So this is my third Ginposium. Luckily, I've always, this is my first time I've ever presented at a Ginposium. So I normally used to sit suitably and respectfully further from the front so I didn't have to stare at my friends and colleagues. It's all good stuff, but there we go. So I made the transition. I'm an interesting sort of mix, a strange creature, if you will, as I made the mix from the shift from industry to academia. I made the shift in 2015 and was fortunate enough to be made assistant professor in September 2016. So it's a real honor to be invited to speak to you today. It's a unique experience to stand in front of pretty much everyone you've ever worked for and potentially everyone you're likely to work for in the future. So yeah, no pressure. So we're going to talk about botanicals and boffins and basics about the scientific approach and how you apply the scientific approach. It's basically, I've got sort of 20, 25 minutes. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but it's just going to give you a bit of an idea, a bit of a taster, if you will. So let's see if we can... Okay, so... hang on, there we go. What's going on? There we go. Right, so welcome, good morning, and also well done, you've made it. You've made it, you've come for the first session through the rush hour traffic, so well done everyone, I feel it's an achievement. This was written 3 or 4 weeks ago, so slightly overtaken by events, so really well done, and all the more reason for doing it. So as I say, that's fine, we'll go to the next one. So, what can we do? So we're very lucky in the gin industry. We're very lucky for many reasons. Obviously, we have a job we're passionate, we're interested in. But also, we work in a meeting ground between where art and creativity and science really kind of cross over. But I'm going to talk about science because I'm wearing the white coat and I'm an assistant professor, so I can properly nerd out. But that's not to suggest that I'm wanting to squish or eliminate any of the art of it. But really, what I'd like to do is to nourish some of that art and creativity by putting it and basing it firmly within facts. I can't really talk about art or about science without talking about Plato. He was one of the first philosophers and the first scientists, as well as having a particularly stunning beard. Really, he was one of the first scientists. So he said, if someone separated the art of counting and measuring and weighing from all of the other arts, what was left of the others would be, so to speak, insignificant. So like it or not, we work within a process-driven industry. Also, he's one of my heroes, but the other hero I could have used was Paracelsus, who was an alchemist, one of the first alchemists and first proto-scientists. He believed that we all had stills within us. He was trying to find what made us tick, what was our lifeblood. He was trying to find the quintessence. He believed we all had stills in our stomachs because he would put things into his still and he would extract this magical elixir that made him feel really good and more alive. So for him, he pronounced, I have found the quintessence, because he felt he had found the essence of life. In actual fact, he just found alcohol, but never mind. So with this in mind, with Plato's words ringing in our ears, what improvements can we make? What can we add from that? I'm going to touch on, because there's about a 2-hour lecture on standardized procedure and process control. I could talk to you for 2 hours. We haven't got that. No, Nick won't allow that. It's fine. But we're also going to be talking about standardized procedure, process control, and botanical selection and recipe formulation. So how do you best control what goes on in your still? If you didn't control what goes on in your still, the still is essentially almost like a chaos engine because you put things inside and then you heat it up and there's 1,000,001 different chemical reactions and interactions and general exciting things going on inside, and then out comes out the other side your distillate, your fabulous product you're going to go and show to the world. But how do you control that? Well, I've done a bit of still commissioning in my time, data sheets, reams of paper, operators tied up for hours, busy taking down figures and temperatures and flow rates and ABVs at certain points. And it's all very well and good, but especially the human error and poor handwriting the handwriting one is a particularly big one for me. I'm dyslexic, so it's like someone's scribbled all over it. But also the last one, scintillating data entry steps. How do we kind of capture that data? Because the more data you have, I spend a lot of time with stills. You spend a lot of time, once you know how they operate, smelling, tasting, listening, and you can hear things. Hang on a minute, something sounds different. If it sounds different, then there's something up. So, but how do we then take that to the next level? How do we make it more scientific? So, flip to the next bit. So this is probably the most powerful, low-powered, low-cost computer around. It's known as the Raspberry Pi. I don't know why they call it the Raspberry Pi, but it's the Raspberry Pi. It's a small programmable computer. It costs a total of £40 to buy, and they've been used now for many different applications. People have used it in the Internet of Things. You can now control your oven from your smartphone. You can now, all sorts of various different applications. But because of their cheapness, you can then add on. They are wireless ready. They're Bluetooth enabled, so you can attach as many Bluetooth enabled, in this country, ATEX sensors to your Raspberry Pi as you can possibly get hold of or afford. It's what's going to come down to, because if anyone's ever bought an ATEX sensor, yes, they'll know they're not cheap. And the reason I actually got turned on to this was I was talking to a friend of mine who works for a high-end electrical manufacturer based in Bristol. I won't give away the name. He works in sensors, and they're doing a lot of work in sensors. And we were talking about it, and he said, well, really, this is going to be the next way of capturing that data, because whereas in the past you'd pay for a large company to come in and install all of this, and large companies do. If you go to the likes of Bombay Sapphire, they've spent an awful lot of money on various sensors and SCADA systems and stuff like that. But this is a way for the craft people to take a piece of that action and capture that data. So having captured the data, what can you then do? So it's hugely powerful. So you could control the temperature profile of your still. You could monitor everything from the boiler performance to the condenser flow rates. You can make informed decisions, and that's a powerful thing. You can save on energy, and the minute you start talking about saving on energy, people's ears prick up, because not only is it good for your green credentials, but also it's money in the bank, it's pound notes. You can monitor things if things can go wrong. And you can also sometimes get more of an idea, rather than sitting there going, no, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't normally sound like that. You can be informed on that, and you can get the data off that and say, hang on a minute, why is the condenser not performing in the same way? Why is the boiler sort of doing a strange little quirk on its output? That gives you so much more power, and you can be forward-looking and proactive. So you could argue in this age of information, are we truly an artisan if you haven't been collecting this sort of data? So, now onwards to botanicals. So you can look up in the literature. You can look up in the literature on what the volatiles content of your botanicals are. But normally in the literature, they normally try and get the maximum amount of information. And so they'll use some really weird and wacky kind of extractive methods and some exotic sort of solvents, such as hexane and the like. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I've never made a gin with hexane. Has anyone made a gin with hexane in here? If you have made a gin with hexane, please come and see me at the end. I think we need to have a talk, okay? My rates are very reasonable. Yes, so where are we? So I got a group of third-year brewing and distilling students in, because the great thing about working at Heriot-Watt University with the brewing and distilling students, it's the easiest sales job you're ever going to get, okay? Because they already come and they're already really enthusiastic and they're already really passionate, and a lot of them do a lot of home brewing, and we don't talk about home distilling. I tell them off and tell them not to do that because it's very illegal and dangerous. But anyway, with the third year's brewing and distilling students come in on a Tuesday morning, 9:15, bright and early. Excellent, we get them in. I thought, right, okay, they have to come in and distill something. We get them in, we got them a single botanical. So what the aim of the experiment was, to ascertain the chemical constituents of each botanical by distilling in isolation in a gin recipe concentration. So we ditched the hexane, and we said, right, okay, we're going to distill the single botanicals in gin, as a gin, at gin concentrations, so in order to replicate exactly what happens. How do we do that? Oh, sorry about. So these are our standard botanicals. These are the classic, the big six. Nothing unusual there. There are plenty of gins made with nothing but that, I dare say, out there on the can possibly comment. So there's nothing outrageous there. Perfectly fine. So then what we did, we distilled them in isolation, using that piece of kit, which may be familiar to some of you from school. as it's just a fairly standard quick fit. There are a few drawbacks and a few people who have things to say about the glass stills, but I think for this instance, because you can clean them pretty much out of existence, and that way it's more of a inert extraction. So what you get in the distillate is what has come from the botanicals and not coming from some part of the still. We actually send it away to a man called Dougie, who's our excellent clean room guy, and it comes back and it's absolutely squeaky clean to the point of like GCMS level. So we also kept things the same because it's made of science, and we also did everything in triplicate, so just to ensure you that the results we're giving you are not a sort of flash in the pan. Right, okie doke. So the standard cut points were made, and the distillate was then sent off for analysis. So this is the best picture I can get of our GCMS SPME. At this point, I was standing on things to try and get all of it in. I thought that's probably best, as good as I'm going to get, because the analytical man had stepped out and he was about to come back. So this is a GCMS, a gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or SPME. And so, what does SPME stand for? It's just gone, damn it, never mind. Anyway, so what happens is, well, this machine is basically a separating machine. And what happens is, if you take this, the SPME works on a fiber, so the fiber goes in, dips into the sample. As it comes out of the sample, it then gets injected into the system, that first bit, and it then becomes vaporized by being heated. And as it starts to, it's solid phase microextractor in SPME, by the way, in case you were wondering. So as it dips in and vaporizes the mixture of volatiles, it then goes into a column. As it goes into a column, the column is essentially a massive coil. And as it's heated and vaporized, it pushes down the coil and then comes out to a reader at the other end, and then it gets blasted with electrons just for good measure. And this separating machine takes that mixture and breaks it up into its component parts. And this is hugely interesting for distillers, and lots of the big distillers in quality control will use GCMS and SPME. So what comes out the other end is you've got if we do 2 runs for GCMS SPME, you do a first run, which is qualitative, so you see what is it, what's in there, and then with the second run is qualitative, so having found out what's in it, how much. So what you get out the other end of all of that is one of those. So you go, oh, look, there's an alpha cubabene, and that's time along the bottom. So at 25.5 minutes, you've got the alpha cubabene popping out at out of the other end. And this is a great way of finding out your constituent points. So, what about the results? So, our first one, there's our Angelica root, and we had alpha cubabene, which came out as herbal and waxy. Humulone, slightly bitter and woody. This, at the moment, is going quite well. I think that's a fairly representative of what I imagine Angelica root is. It's slightly herbal, slightly woody. I'm not too sure about oceanic. That's a bit of an unusual one for me. Citrus, lemon, orange, fresh, sweetness. That's all very, very good. Excellent, wonderful stuff. Okay, that's that one. One of cassia. So alpha cubabene, herbal, waxy. Yep, again, woody, and hints of bergamot, myrrh, neroli, and green. That's very good. Yeah, lovely stuff. Coriander seeds, so alpha pinene. This is getting into the nitty-gritty now. We are our old friend, the coriander seed. Alpha pinene, fresh camphor, sweet. Camphor's a weird one. Don't forget, we're building a balanced product. That's the ultimate aim of all of these things, is to build a well-balanced product. So camphor on its own is a bit much, but in a tiny amount, as a mixture of other smells and scents, it actually is quite pleasant. At low concentrations. That's always when you smell things coming off the still, I always tell the students that yes, all right, it might smell a little bit cheesy at really high concentration, but then as part of the bigger picture, it's actually quite interesting. We've got floral there's roses, lavender, green and waxy. So these are the coriander, and last but not least, our old friend, the juniper. This is a really excellent bit of work here. Herbal, waxy, minty even, citrus. Now, as I was compiling these together, I sat and I was thinking, well, there are a few differences, but you have to admit there are also quite a few similarities. And what I needed, I like a good infographic, as any good scientist should. And I thought, well, what I need is an infographic that kind of will represent the differences, but also represent the similarities. And I thought, well, I knew what it was. I've worked in Clapham, and then we've got a street named after the chap. So what I really needed was a Venn diagram. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm introducing you to my first Venn diagram. There we go, folks. And as you can see, our botanicals were our standard issue traditional botanicals, had an awful lot in common with juniper. So could it be said that in order for it to work in order to work with juniper, it has to have an awful lot of chemically in common with juniper, but also they work quite well with each other, classically, because I mean, cassia and angelica and coriander, and also they also have quite a lot in common with themselves. So in order to develop a recipe, a new botanical, you're essentially adding a new circle to the Venn diagram. So by using the information from those single botanical distillates, we can use that. So also, right, one other point there, licorice and orris root, we put them in and it came up below detectable limits. So that's quite interesting. That's for a scientist, for a slightly nerdy science bod, for a boffin, if you will, to come back to the title of the original thing. That's actually quite interesting because that means that there's more questions to be answered. So I want to go out and look into what's going on with licorice and orris. But this is, don't forget, was at the concentrations of a standard gin recipe. So there's interesting stuff. What I could do is I could supersaturate it and put loads and loads of orris and licorice in and see what happens. But that's not representative. That wasn't the point of the whole exercise. So what can we do with this information? So we can analyze the interplay of botanicals with juniper. We can use the chemicals found in the botanicals as a shopping list to find the same and similar new botanicals. So taken from having looked at the class of chemicals, mono and sesquiter terpenes, by the way, are the main class of chemicals that come across in gin. And essentially add more circles to that Venn diagram to build on that complexity. So also, I'd like to conduct further research into orris and licorice root. So there's a few references, because it's science. An acknowledgement, thank you for the third year of brewing and distilling. Thank you for the analytical team. And also thank you guys for having me.